This is a moment to transform our institutions. That's what I like the term that Stacey Davis Gates have mentioned about the attempt to a third reconstruction, because we really have to reconstruct, rebuild, and transform our institutions so that really institutions of care, of solidarity.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today our guest will be well known to people in the Chicagoland area. It's Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez from the 25th Ward, who is, unlike many elected officials, has been active and a part of our movement for many years. And so he speaks from that perspective, and but also as an elected official gives us a unique view. So we're really fortunate to have him on Fight Back Radio. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, Byron.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be here with Fight Back Radio, and looking forward to a conversation to strategize and really coordinate efforts from the grassroots up. I think that's really important.
Yes, I agree. I want to start by asking you about, in the electoral world, New York City's made the news recently with Zohran Mamdani getting the Democratic nomination for mayor. There's elections coming up now where he'll have to face Andrew Cuomo again, as well as Eric Adams, the current sitting mayor. But he has the Democratic nomination and ran on a platform that's very progressive, and much like what we were trying to do in Chicago over the last 2 years. What's your assessment of what's going on in New York and compared to Chicago? And what advice would you have for Mamdani in terms of going forward?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it's really exciting what we've seen in New York. I mean, there's definitely a movement there of working people coming together to defeat the billionaires and fascism. I think is historic to have a nominee for mayor in the Democratic Party, the first Muslim immigrant mayor in the history of New York. And in a time where fascism is on the rise, in a time where we have billionaires investing billions of dollars to misinform, there has been already, by the Trump administration, Senate, and Congress, the largest transfer of wealth from working people to the billionaires in the history of the country, at the time as we have a fascist regime persecuting immigrants, racially profiling, disappearing people, putting people in concentration camps, and now even deporting them to concentration camps abroad, especially with dictators like in El Salvador. So it is important that we see in New York, which is a port of entry. I can attest to the importance of port of entry. New York being one of those port of entries for immigrants for generations, just like our community here in Chicago, Pilsen, Little Village, have been port of entries for immigrants, yet it has been a place of contestation, also for national politics like in Chicago. What I see also here is an attempt within the Democratic Party, as we saw when Bernie Sanders ran for president, when now we have a nominee for the Democratic Party in New York for mayor. And what we saw in Chicago is the alignment of neoliberals and MAGA fascists to try to stop working people and to demonize socialists, to demonize Muslims, immigrants, LGBTQ, trans rights are under attack. So today what we see is a clear fight of working people versus billionaires. We saw it in Chicago when we elected Mayor Johnson. We continue to see that campaign of misinformation, of divide and conquer, of putting immigrant communities against each other. Let's remember how Governor Abbott, the Republican governor from Texas, was sending thousands of people to Chicago. We ended up having 52,000 immigrants sent here inhumanely in very precarious conditions, and then tried to blame the city after the convention, after the DNC was taking place. And that's what was I was firmly opposing the DNC coming to Chicago because of weaponization and how our communities were being targeted and pitched against each other. Similarly, in New York, I think that when we see, ironically, the Cuomo regime, the Democratic Party, the establishment, and I'm talking with them, Cuomo, Rahm Emanuel, right? Those are the interests that are trying to come back to the scene. And I think it's very important for people to understand that. I actually came as a former teacher organizing with Karen Lewis. That's how I ended up, running for office as an immigrant representing my immigrant community. Our community is under attack. So let's imagine now what would be now in Chicago, for those who followed the election in Chicago when Mayor Johnson and former candidate Ballas, right, who had largely the support of big sections of the party. I think that would have been a real tremendous challenge for us to be fighting the federal government with someone like Ballas in the mayor's office. I'm glad that we have a mayor, a Black progressive mayor, the since Mayor Harold Washington. We never had this opportunity, and it's contested. And I think it's important to see the campaign of misinformation and what we see with Zoran in New York. It is also a call for us to coordinate, to bring working class communities, to bring our cities to fight establishment, to fight billionaires, because we have our own set of billionaires. We don't have only Elon Musk in the Republican Party that put $250 million to buy the election and now have fascists, only to now, when it didn't go his way, now talking about the Epstein files and now pretending like he was not complicit in all of that, right? Similarly, we have in Chicago billionaires like Michael Sachs. They used to be called the Ram Whisperer. And now we know these names because we fought them with Karen Lewis when they were closing 50 schools, when they displaced over 300,000 Black residents for the city of Chicago, when they were undermining our Sanctuary City ordinances, when they tried to cover up Laquan McDonald. Those are the billionaires behind scenes that have now have bought almost half the city council to create what is now I think that the return of the council wars, as we saw in the 80s, when Marty Quinn at the helmet of that, and Riley really the right-wing elements. These are people, for people who don't know Chicago, they're people who were associated with Michael Madigan. They're now getting money from Michael Sachs. So now we see the establishment, the entrenched establishment, trying to stop working people, and they're going to do the same thing to Zoran. They're going to the whisper campaign, the dirty campaign, the dark money coming in last minute, the demonization, the dehumanization, the bigotry. You see the xenophobia, all of that we see now played out in the mayoral race, or full support to future Mayor Zoran, because he must be doing something right when he has not only the MAGA fascists like Trump talking about deporting him, but also the Cuomos and the Rahm Emanuels who said that they have the recipe, quote unquote, of putting the party in the right place. I'm a socialist, and I want to be clear. I'm a democratic socialist. I'm an independent. I have the right to criticize both parties as I see them very aligned with the capitalist agenda, right? And also understanding that we got to work coalition. We need to establish a wide range coalition that is not only the electoral strategy, the grassroots strategy, the union labor organizing with immigrant rights to defeat fascism. But let's not naive. We not only have to fight the MAGA fascists, but we also have to fight the neoliberal corrupt elements of the Democratic Party like Rahm Emanuel and Cuomo, as you see, vested into defeating working people. This is billionaires versus the working class people as I see it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there with what you said, and thank you for that. Yeah, on Fight Back Radio, criticizing neoliberals and Democrats is not a problem. So we're happy to have you here. I want to dig in a little bit to, I noticed, Mamdani, one of the themes of his campaign is to make New York City affordable for working class people. And here in Chicago, that's also a theme of, what Mayor Brandon Johnson and you have been involved in. And, so for Mamdani, he talks about, free, public transportation and city grocery stores, universal child care. But I want to talk a little bit here about the housing issue. And I know you're a leader in the council on housing. I think you're the chair of the housing committee, and you've been controversial. There's been talk about having you be the zoning chairman, and which is a powerful position because it allows the billionaires, as you say, to get either a leg up or not, and because zoning is a way that our government can halt or advance development. Can you talk a little bit about the fight for affordable housing in Chicago, and counterpose it to some of the development issues, and how we look at that in 21st century America? How to what's appropriate, what isn't, and why do these rich people not want you to be the zoning chair so much? Why do they hate you so much?
Yeah, so I think, and it's really really important. I think I like the connections with what's going on in New York, right? Big urban municipalities are facing with a huge issue of affordability, and I think in the New York race, that's what we saw, and I commend him for his clear message and not capitulating to the billionaires when he was talking about the rent freeze, when he was talking about affordability, to make sure that New York is the city for everyone, especially New Yorkers. He talked about the $30 minimum wage by 30 by 30. So he's talking directly to the working people. And I think here in Chicago, we saw the same thing in 2023 when we talked about the same thing about affordable housing, public housing, investing in people. The city of Chicago now, as you know, passed the sub-minimum wage, the ordinance to increase tip wages for workers. We also have work not only to increase the salaries of workers, but also to address the issue of affordability. As housing chair, we've seen, like in communities like mine, how 50,000 residents, vast majority Mexican and Mexican American residents, were displaced because of the corruption, because of that's what I mentioned, his names, like former Speaker Madigan, right, the head of the party for a long time. His right-hand guy is now leading the opposition in city council, Marty Quinn, right? And Riley, who was the lobbyist for Michael Madigan, right? Those are the two big opponents of the mayor's agenda. And there are big advocates of development. Look, Marty Quinn have talked about, he opposed the ADUs, the accessible dwelling units, almost 100,000 units that could be legalized. In anybody who's been in Chicago knows how many attics, coach houses, basements we have, that we want to make sure that we put it out there to help people in the community, especially small homeowners that need a little bit extra income, that need help to legalize those ADUs, as they know, accessible dwelling units. Marty Quinn opposed that vehemently because he said that they will take control, that we will take control away from them. And let's remember what they were accused of. In Michael Madigan and his organization, they were accused of nothing of extorting people. That's what some of the charges that they have. So for us to talk about prerogative is not only aldermanic prerogative, it is community prerogative, so that we can put those units to the in the community for people who need housing. Imagine what would be to put 100,000 units of housing out there affordable, right? So, but he is opposing it. In fact, he deferred and published something that to me is common sense. We got a pilot that shows the effectiveness. We see it in other municipalities, but that's the kind of stuff that they oppose. Not only they oppose that they have opposed they were at the helmet of opposing me as zoning chair. Why? Because we believe that housing is a human right. We believe also that we cannot allow to have 70,000 people unhoused. Almost 20,000 of those are CPS children that need housing, and that we believe that we need to do everything possible so that the speculation and developers do not dictate what's possible. They don't dictate a law, certainly, right? So what we see, with these practices that are controlled by billionaires like Michael Sachs and the realtors associations, that the big money that oppose my appointment, because we believe strongly that it's immoral to have 60,000 units that are vacant in the city of Chicago at the same time as we have 60,000 plus people that are unhoused, 60 to 70,000. So when we talked about regulating developers, when we talk about making sure that they don't do as they please, we talk about pushing for affordability. We talk about fighting vacancies. We're talking about lifting I have a resolution in city council right now to lift the unconstitutional ban on rent control at the state level, something that will continue to push Governor Pritzker to deliver for the promises that he's made. But I think that right now in the city of Chicago, there's a fight between billionaires and working people, and those puppets of the establishment like Marty Quinn, like Alderman Riley, that stopped any attempt for us to push back on casino capitalism, which was these are the people who voted. And we're going to talk now about TIF, the TIF incremental funding funds that has been used as a piggy bank account for city council, Mayor Daley, Ram, and later Lori Lightfoot. Remember in 2019, after Mayor Lightfoot campaign of not giving $2.3 billion to two mega developments in the city, Lincoln Yards and the 78. As soon as she came into office, we were protesting at the foot doors of City Council for her to fulfill her campaign promise. She broke her campaign promise on day one. $2.3 billion were given to two developers that promised 20,000 units of housing, never delivered them. $2.3 billion. Now, some of these interests oppose me because I want to take money that people in my community already paid for, as Mayor Washington did. Mayor Washington did something that he implemented the first tax incremental funding district in the city, actually in Humboldt Park. Look at Humboldt Park and how they've been able to preserve some affordable housing, also institutions like the Puerto Rican Cultural Center and so forth. So we believe that TIF should be used for affordability, for schools, for public works, not for private development. That's why when I propose, and I sent a proposal, again, I'm not defending the TIF program. Is a lot to say about the TIF program. When we have to compare, because this conversation has been between pro-TIF and anti-TIF. In the meantime, TIF has been used, as you know, to balance budgets, including for the Chicago Public Schools, has been used to even help fund the budget and balance the budget in City Council, but has also represented billions of dollars. Just Riley's word, $1 billion that they took for private development while our schools are being defunding. Districts like mine don't have playgrounds, don't have air conditioning, don't have basic needs. We have also a very ambitious plan where we did eminent domain of 6.3 acres of land in our ward, where they wanted to have, as soon as they came into office, 500 luxury units. Now we did eminent domain public land to do 500 all affordable. And now when we want to put money in the public works, we have people like Riley and Marty Quinn misinforming so that they keep status quo. We believe, and we supported the teachers on the proposal to sunset and expire TIFs. That is already happening. That's why Mayor Johnson already issued a $1.25 billion bond, TIF bond, so that we don't rely on that. But these elements of the Democratic Party, Riley was a Republican until not too long ago. Same thing with Marty Quinn, represent the most entrenched parts of the machine in Chicago, now fully funded by billionaire Michael Sachs. By the way, Michael Sachs also tried to steer business for pensions, especially teachers' pensions, to his hedge fund. That's what the fight is about. It's about these billionaires and their puppets to control funds for pensions, to control development. And what they said about my appointment in zoning was that they wanted, quote unquote, predictability, meaning that they want to make sure that people get paid so that they get their goodies, their outcome. I don't, as a democratic socialist, as someone who believes, after inheriting, as you know, a big mess by my predecessor, who was an informant of the FBI and actually was involved in the racketeering, extortion, and federal charges that convicted former Speaker Madigan. I took them all the way to the Supreme Court. These fights are very important because we cannot betray the trust of the public, and that's what we're fighting for, a city for everybody, when we can afford it. So we're doing ADUs. We want to put more money in affordable housing and public housing. We want to transform our city. And as I heard my good friend Stacey Davis Gates said, right, this is an attempt of the third reconstruction in our country, right? We have seen since the abolition of slavery, civil rights. This is a time for us to reconstruct and rebuild our city after decades of neoliberal policies. I think the last chance we had to do this. So there's a blueprint with Mayor Washington. So I am proud to keep fighting for our community and our city to remain to be affordable for the Chicagoans who have believed in us to clean house and to move us in a different direction.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you for that. So there's just for our Fight Back Radio listeners, I just underline what you've already said, Byron. But Michael Madigan was the Speaker of the Illinois House, and and he's been convicted. I think he's awaiting sentencing now, or appeal. I'm not sure, but. But he was the head of the Democratic Party in a extreme. If you're not in Illinois, yeah, he's a very powerful Democratic Party official, and Quinn and Riley are two of his most loyal, and it benefited much from the huge amounts of money that were dumped into the Democratic Party coffers in Illinois. And so these are names that are well known to people in Chicago and Illinois, but less so maybe in other places. I want to go back to the TIF thing though, because this tax increment financing thing is an issue in Chicago for sure, and around the country. And for decades, you alluded to this because Harold Washington did use it for the Puerto Rican Culture Center and to preserve businesses in the Humboldt Park area. But the all the community groups, or most of them anyways, have opposed TIFs, and it's been there's been many years trying to educate the community what is a TIF. And I know the teachers union, which you've mentioned, has said, look, we should take this money and put it into education over the years. And Mayor Johnson has done that, and you voted for it as well. So you're trying to reclaim this tool for the community, and some of the confusion maybe that we didn't, our education wasn't good enough over the years in telling people what it was. But we were all protesting. You were there too, against this TIF or that TIF or whatever. And so can you explain a little bit again how how this money flows, and why the big businesses want it to flow to them, but you're trying to use it to get it to flow to working class people, to make housing and other things affordable and in the community.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things about gentrification and displacement, right, that is happening right now. I mean, many communities are being displaced, and I think we learned a few things, from the Mayor Washington years, is that the importance of making sure that we have a plan, because without a plan, it is hard to fight a trend that is global, that is national, that quite frankly is one of those things that capitalism has been able to really push heavy in communities like ours, right? That is profit at all costs, and the huge development. And our community, as I said, was a victim of that. 15 years of displacement, has taken a toll on our community. We are feeling the effects of displacement, big development, and for that we need a plan. And a plan means that we need to counter that with everything that we have at our disposal. And that's what I mentioned, the history of it. Mayor Washington attempted to do that. I think it started to implement some of that, and his goal, and I think is, and again, the Mayor Washington was necessarily a socialist mayor, but what I'm telling you is that he believed in working for the people. And I think that everybody across the city can tell you that, especially in communities like ours, that he was not neglecting communities in the south side, west side, southwest side. And part of that was investing in communities. That's what Mayor Johnson also have talked about: investing, building housing, affordable housing, build public housing, build infrastructure for schools, because is this trend of displacement also affects our schools. The enrollment in our schools here in the 25th Ward has been devastating. Our enrollment before the new neighbors came in, as you know, because as new migrants came in, inhumanely brought by Governor Abbott in very inhumane conditions, but also we receive in our community the larger number of migrants in the city. We've been doing it we did it since it started in August of, I believe August of 2022, when the big trains started and people started showing up on police stations, right? So our communities have been suffering from the lack of affordable housing housing that can be affordable to people who are working class families. We're being a port of entry. Many undocumented, many migrants live still in our community. Yet it's very difficult to build, and the new buildings don't incorporate any housing for people from my community. So the goal of having a TIF increments financing to work immediately for working people is to increase the number of affordable housing units. We have already plans. This is not theoretical. We have already a plan ready to be financed for 500, almost 500, all affordable at 30% of AMI housing that is public land. We talk about rebuilding public housing, investing in housing co-ops, investing in helping small homeowners keep their homes so that they don't lose their homes because they cannot keep up with the repairs, because their incomes are not keeping up with inflation. They're not keeping up with the high cost of living. So we have a plan that we in fact mail our plan. We did not jump on the wagon of this plan right and sudden. We've been working on a plan to defeat displacement, and we have heard from our elders. Look, the young lords gave us a good lesson from the past in Lincoln Park. For anybody who has been in Chicago, you'll see a Lincoln Park now is one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city. There's not even a single trace of a strong Puerto Rican community that once lived and fought in that community. The young lords lost a very important fight, but was able to help us win one in our community when the Lincoln Park landmarked many buildings in Lincoln Park landmarked many buildings and effectively displaced by high repair costs everybody from that community. I had the opportunity to meet with Chacha Jimenez from the Young Lords when he was giving a lot of talks in our neighborhoods about displacement. We learned about that. When I came into office, that was the first fight that we have to take to stop this landmark designation so that we do not increase rapidly the cost of living in the middle of a pandemic, right? So we fought Mayor Lightfoot. We successfully won that. And that money, ironically, that money that was generated from the state, this TIF expansion, was actually going to come from these developers who now were going to not only being able to buy buildings because people would not be able to upkeep with them, but they would get money from TIF to repair them. So we disrupted that plan, and we learned that we needed to have a plan to mitigate the effects of high-end development that was coming to our neighborhood since my predecessor was attracting those developers. So we were able to find a plan where we have a participatory budget where we want to make sure that we do this democratically. That's what this plan is still in review. We mailed 9,600 people a detailed plan on how we intend to use the public dollars entirely for public works and to help the small businesses and the small homeowners, owner-occupied properties, long-time residents who are being displaced, but now maybe they can end up maybe being in a co-op, maybe we ended up, or maybe be able to get some urgent help so that they don't lose their buildings. So this is an anti-displacement plan. Make no mistake about it. So when we hear Alderman Riley complain about how we want to take this funding that is about $900 million in the next, while the duration of the TIF that right now is industrial, where corporations like Target have been benefiting by this kind of financing, we want to make sure that people see, because this that we talk about, you also mentioned how Zoran is fighting for affordable childcare. This actually helps us invest in childcare facilities. This helps us invest in education, in our schools, in public works, to expand our library, to help, to have our community build more affordable housing. So this was a very ambitious plan to stop and address displacement as we see it. That's what got the attention of billionaires like Michael Sachs and Riley and Marty Quinn, who are the biggest opponents of this plan. We're still democratic, and that's what we believe that, and you mentioned something very critical, Richard, we got to do more education, more popular education, so people don't feel that we are imposing a plan on them, and that this is truly in the best interest, not only of our neighborhood, but the city of Chicago, while TIFs are here, because Mayor Johnson has said that he's letting them expire. They will, and then, many aldermen like Riley and Quinn will never let anybody touch their TIFs. But when you propose a plan like this, that anti-displacement, I think that we got to look at who oppose these plans. And yes, there is some opposition locally that is being co-opted by Michael Sachs. And I tell you that because my opponent from last election, heavily funded by Michael Sachs, and now they are funding some of these, they call themselves grassroots organizations. But I have questioning they demand that they expose where I'm getting my funding and who is supporting me. You can see most of our socialist organizations are being targeted because they supported this plan. But I want to disclose what the plan was about. They're not opposing the plan. They're opposing socialist and leftist quote unquote organizations. And that should be eye-opening for anybody who's reviewing that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I want to, go back because what you said about Lincoln Park, I've been in Chicago for a long time, and this is definitely true. Chacha Jimenez, I'm glad you lifted up his name. He just passed away this year, and was the leader of the Young Lords, and this was a Puerto Rican neighborhood. It was mixed, but mostly Puerto Rican, I think, in the 60s and 70s, and they fought to preserve Lincoln Park as their neighborhood. And but the developers came in, and it's true, they were there's not very many Puerto Ricans in Lincoln Park, if any, and that stamp of culture is definitely gone. And it's a very rich neighborhood. It is now, and during the Reagan years and Bush years, public housing, which was it wasn't great housing in Chicago, but there was lots of it, was destroyed, and people were promised that they would be replaced with better housing. And that never happened. And for the most part, large numbers of people have left Chicago for that reason. Our population is down quite a bit. And this isn't unique to Chicago, it's other cities too. But these developers that you're naming, and I'm glad you're naming them, need to be held to account, the billionaires. I want to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned earlier about Governor Abbott from Texas, who sent large numbers of immigrants to Chicago, some in the dead of winter with no just dropping them off on the corner, and at first, and Mayor Johnson, who was a relatively new mayor at that time, was scrambling to try to deal with this in a humane way. And I was wondering, part of this was the Trump administration and Governor Abbott, before Trump was elected, were saying things about sanctuary cities. Chicago, I think, was targeted maybe the most because the Democratic National Convention was to be held here, and they wanted to embarrass him. Also, a stated goal by some on the right was to drive a wedge between Black community and Latino communities, particularly Mexican American, but others as well. Many of the immigrants were from Venezuela. And so in the midst of all this, Mayor Johnson, and with your support, was scrambling to take care of new arrivals, to make sure that they had housing for those that were under 18, make sure that they were enrolled in schools. We had a referendum called Bring Chicago Home, which you supported, and which was defeated. I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about this issue? I guess it's homelessness, it's immigration. There's many things tied up in that. But can you talk about that time, and how you dealt with it as an alderman, and what your thoughts on what the mayor was doing at that time as well?
Yes, thank you. And that is important because that's been, of course, largely a point of criticism for the Mayor Johnson administration of how he handled that. But let's remember, I think that's what it is important to look at, with a critical eye, but also an honest eye. Remember when Mayor Johnson came into office, there were over 30,000 people already in police stations with no plan. And I tell you, Mayor Lightfoot completely neglected the issue. I think in September of 2022, when we already started seeing a large number of people coming from Texas, specifically to our city, we saw a large number of people already being unable to be housed. I tell you that our winter of December 2022, we saw that many people were getting kicked out of shelters in the middle of the winter time in December 2022. So they were already at capacity when the announcement of the DNC in Chicago. All it did is basically open up a huge problem for the city, because Governor Abbott, who is a fascist, the way that if anybody can go to the border, you can see the level of inhumanity that this individual is forging on children. I mean, he's denying human rights to children, turning away. The other day, I heard a report of a 4-year-old child that was, extremely dehydrated. It was turned away, and with the orders of Abbott to basically turn anybody away and put him back into the river. These are the type of individuals that are dealing at the border, yet they have the audacity to even mention about human rights or portray themselves as some sort of religious moral leaders. I mean, it's incredible the fascists are turning this around. But I tell you, let's remember when we have thousands of people, as the convention was in Chicago, coming on a daily basis with no plan. Until Mayor Johnson came into office in May 2023, we went with Mayor Johnson, look at some of the conditions in not only police stations, in airports and viaducts, and the attempt to destabilize the city. That's what they want. And fascists usually want chaos, want violence. And that's what they were trying to do to Chicago. As you know, Trump and their cronies are obsessed with Chicago, always demonizing it, always trying to portray it as a violent and chaotic city. Well, Mayor Johnson, when he came into office, he did what he was expected to do, what he was campaigning to do, which is actually find a solution for this issue that was not our own doing, but it was being exacerbated rapidly when we have almost 30,000 people inhumanely. Let's remember, even a little girl, a 5-year-old, died in transit. In a bus because of the inhumane treatment. I hope that someday this is investigated and Governor Abbott is put to trial. There was also a 3-year-old boy that died because of sepsis, because of the conditions nearby one of our shelters, actually in my ward. So when we saw like the number of people that were arriving, Mayor Johnson, and I think when we saw like the number of people in the 12th district, which most people already started arriving since beginning of 2022, we had to declare an emergency in our ward because, as you know, with the pandemic, our immigrant communities have been fending for on our own, basically. So we called it, as Mayor Johnson was coming into office, we declared an emergency. We opened up the first emergency shelter to house 250 people, mainly families with children, because of the inhumane conditions and more people arriving. Mayor Johnson later used a similar model to expand and open up 11 shelters in a matter of I would say a few months, with very little help. Then, we had to open up before the winter started. In our ward, one of the largest shelters was planned for 1,000 people. But because of municipalities across the state were not willing to help, let's remember in December of 2023, there was an agreement with the city of Joliet to receive 2,000 people in coordination with the state. But because there was no real true leadership at the state level, the city council in Joliet voted down the proposal and sent 2,000 people in the middle of the winter time back to Chicago. So by December, fortunately, the city has had a plan to shelter everybody to prevent a bigger tragedy. We in our shelter here in our ward, we had almost 2,500 people, almost a city within our neighborhood in one of our shelters, the largest shelter. We have shelters and people that needed urgent help, and as we said publicly, this was about saving lives when others wanted to create chaos and violence. Unfortunately, also with the challenge of dealing with Michael Sachs and Juan Rangel, as you know, former UNO CEO, that were spreading misinformation, trying to blame the city, trying to pitch communities against each other. the Mexican community against the Venezuelan community, the Black community against the Latino community. These are the architects of neoliberalism and chaos in our city that coming back, so the misinformation, the spread of rumors that were making our task even harder. When people living in Juliet were returning people, it was a really, really difficult time. But I tell you that it was also a time where, our city really should be commended for the way that they responded to save lives. The children enroll, as you mentioned, in our schools. I'm thankful for district that welcome hundreds of children into our district with very little notice, but they inserted them. In fact, that is in a way how our enrollments in our community were stabilized. So whenever other people saw the negatives, some people saw the importance of having more people who having children in our schools, to having more people in our communities. Never, as you mentioned, when the same individuals like Juan Rangel, right? Remember, they were the people who were directly involved with Rahm Emanuel to pitch the Black and brown communities against each other when they were building charter schools, new charter schools in corrupt schemes. They were shutting down the schools in the Black community. 300,000 Black residents were displaced. Schools were shut down. Communities completely experienced a bloodshed. These were the architects, Rahm Emanuel, Juan Rangel. These are the same people now that are coming back to spread misinformation and blame the mayor for a response that honestly was an emergency response. There's a lot to be said about things that could have done better. But I tell you that it wasn't because the lack of will, but the lack of public or political desire, because of all this misinformation, all this division, and people didn't want to look at the facts and really, rubber their, put themselves to work, right? So I think that we responded the best way we can. And I tell you, to this day, I think I have no regrets of having able to save lives. And some of these kids now are in our community. Some of them are now back on their feet. And I tell you that I never forget the way that Chicago treat people, despite of these bad elements. And that's what I named them: Juan Rangel and Rahm Emanuel and Michael Sachs, creating chaos even in the middle of a crisis. They focus their time spending trying to demonize people like the mayor and I, in a time where we really, and I'll say, eventually the state, county, and city, shoulder to shoulder, was able to help to make sure that we don't have chaos in the city. The DNC, even though they did not offer, and that's what my criticism was, and I almost got, as you know, censured because I opposed to it, because I opposed the war, I opposed the genocide in Gaza, and the fact that the DNC didn't offer a platform for the immigrant community and the Palestinian community, something I repeat today. But these same elements of the party are the people creating division and continue to do the same thing, even in the midst of fascism. And that's what we need to make sure that we call them out.
Yeah, no, that's thank you. I mean, you mentioned Juan Rangel, who was discredited from the United Neighborhood Organization, or UNO as it's called here. It now is actually a major lobbyist down in Springfield for these same people you're talking to, but was discredited. And of course, Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, who closed 50 schools in 1 year, and wanted to close a lot more while privatizing and opening up charter schools that weren't really serving the well. I mean, it's a mixed bag with the charter schools, as you know. I was but certainly the people that work in the charter schools do a great, do the best job they can. But the idea of privatizing and taking away any kind of oversight has been a disaster around the country, and we fight to get that back. I want to talk to you about this misinformation you talked about. Michael Sachs, the developer, as well. I should have thrown him in there. But the misinformation, it had some effect. It wasn't without effect. And divisions. You're right, between people of Mexican descent and Venezuelan descent, Black people and Latinos. And people were, thinking that the very, very limited resources their communities were receiving would go to somebody else, some other, that was the idea. And of course, the rich all wanted to come to them. How do we repair this? How do we start to reach out across different parts? Chicago is a very segregated city as well, as I think many, if not all, major cities in the United States are. But it's there's how do we build trust across communities and build a movement that's multinational, multiracial?
That's an excellent question, Richard. And I think that's what it poses the moment poses that opportunity, right? I'm really glad that what's happening in New York, because I think it offers a way forward. It offers a way for us to really build a coalition, a working class coalition. But one of the things that we cannot capitulate is to fascism or to genocide, or to be silent in a moment where immigrant communities are being, or trans communities or Muslim communities are being dehumanized, criminalized, and disappear, right? So I think that in a moment like this, we don't capitulate, and that's what I think it is important. My recommendation to Zoran and his great campaign, not to capitulate, right, but to continue firm, right, and to continue to build coalition, but to also call out, and I think he's done, to the elements like Cuomo. I think is their own version of Rahm Emanuel in New York, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
So to continue to expose that, to continue to speak truth to power, not to capitulate, not to ignore the calls for the rental freeze, the $30 hours minimum wage, to make sure that they put the working class people ahead of anybody, and make sure that, again, he's not afraid. I'm glad, he is, as an immigrant, he's not afraid about talking about international solidarity, also focusing with always putting our city first, right? Of city first, without or never at the expense of anybody else, right? So I really think that this poses an opportunity to really frame the conversation about working class people, and that means immigrants, Muslims, trans, black, brown, white, Asian, all of us, right? Against the billionaire class. And I think that we should do more to connect these billionaires and their puppets who do their dirty work for them. The dark money in politics, it is intended to misinform. These people own the media, right? The corporate media. They own many posts in elected office. So it is a machine that is being with us for a long, long time, that has consolidated the power. Neoliberals have paved the way for fascists. Neoliberals like Rahm and Cuomo are the reason that now we have Rahm Emanuel. Like, remember, like Hillary Clinton did that to elevate Trump, and ended up, not only elevating him, but putting him to the White House, because they were complicit in trying to select who their opponents are. Governor Pritzker, and I think I'll be always very clear, tried to do the same thing with their Republican opponent. But when they elevate right-wing extremists, right? I think that the danger here is that instead of building coalition, they're elevating extremism and then dividing also the working class base. They are, in fact, Governor Pritzker has been one of the most vocal voices against Mayor Johnson. Why? Because he supported the ceasefire, something that Governor Pritzker is not going to do, because he's in fact investing in the genocide with tax dollars, state dollars. He's also very silent on the immigrant issue. He, in fact, in his last budget, cut access to medical care for immigrant seniors. $400 million in the budget that we wiped out, even though we have exposed to him the importance of keeping that access of healthcare for everybody, independent of immigration status. Look, now we have over 535,000 people that are left without medical care because Trump and the cronies cut Medicare in the state of Illinois and many other states. So the need to us not only to talk the talk, but to walk the walk is real. And that's why I'm continuing to criticize Governor Pritzker, even though I do believe, of course, he'll be a better choice than Trump. But I do think that it is important that we are true and honest and always unequivocal about our commitment to working people. I think in that sense, perhaps Governor Pritzker, because he's a billionaire, he's a little bit out of touch of the needs of working people. And that's going to be a problem, because when we talk about the needs of working people, I think we have someone like Zoran, someone like Mayor Johnson, that are at least being willing to work together and build coalition. This is the moment to build a wide range coalition to defeat fascism, because if we don't defeat fascism, as Chairman Verhampton said, if we don't stop fascism will stop all of us. So we need to create a coalition, but we cannot create a coalition when we have people denying the genocide, when they're denying a right of rights for immigrant rights, and immigrants are putting now in encampments, now denied, even water, basic elements of human rights, putting now in an alligator concentration camp to disappear or die, right? We already have someone dying in an operation by ICE. So when is enough, right? And I think the time to act is now. And this coalition of working people, I think, are no mistake and no coincidence that they're happening in the two largest cities. And I think that eventually, I'll see what's happening in LA. I think is going to also result on another. And I see in LA, a lot of people are already now talking about organizing and building a coalition, building a strong movement because of what's happening in LA and the attacks on the city. But it's no mistake that New York and Chicago are now, because of the timing, now are leading this fight and the multiple lessons to work with one another, because the billionaires will not rest. The billionaires continue to pitch us against each other. The billionaires and the cronies, and I think it's important to name them by name, are really trying to instill division in a time where we need to build a wide-range working-class coalition in our country. Because what has happened abroad, what is being normalized abroad, when we have dictatorships, and that's what in Chicago, we also had a rich legacy, like with Mayor Johnson and Mayor Washington, but we also have the Chicago Boys that were complicit with the coup against President Allende in Chile, an assassination that went from a strong democratic country to be now that was in the hands of one of the most bloodiest dictators in their history, Pinochet, that disappeared over 30,000 people. We're seeing the same thing in India with Modi, the Hindu supremacists that were also backed by President Biden. It's no mistake that we lost the election because capitulating to fascism, and neoliberals do that time after time, ultimately deliver our own fascist dictator. And that's what we have today. But the resistance, I think, is in Chicago, the resistance is in New York, the resistance is in LA, and the resistance will continue to grow. I think it's important. I think we got to get dark money out of politics. That's the number one thing. We got to get away from these puppets of the billionaires to put real representatives. And as the fight continues, because Malcolm X said it, is the ballot or the ballot. Many of us, we've seen the ballot as an option, and the ballot killing people for way too long. Children are killing in our neighborhoods and abroad every day, and it doesn't have to be the norm. So I think Chicago and New York offer a possibility of a different world where we got to work together and learn from each other's experiences and challenges. I think, to me, will continue to be working class people versus billionaires. And in that fight, I know working people will fight. And I think that international solidarity, because coordination and cooperation are going to help us to overcome the challenges of climate change, of the challenges of immigration, the challenges that are really threatening the existence of the world with wars and chaos. And I do think Chicago and New York offer a possibility of the ballot in a times where, of course, the electoral option is not the all ends meet. It is one of the many ways that we need to resist. We need to do the grassroots. We need to do everything that we can within our power to stop fascism. But I do think New York and Chicago offer a possibility of what can be.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think your points are good. I mean, there's only one working class, and it's every race, every nationality, it's every person, and when we're united, we're strong, and we can take on these billionaires. And we need to fight hard for that unity and to listen to each other and see each other's needs and work together. On that note, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the trade union movement in Chicago and nationally as well. I know when Mayor Brandon Johnson, when he first got elected, he walked the picket lines at Chicago State, and I don't think I've ever seen a mayor on the picket line that I can remember. I know right after you got elected, I was at that time I was negotiating at Instituto del Progreso Latino, and it might have been when I met you first. I don't know, or maybe I knew you before that, but you hadn't even taken office yet. I think you were just elected. You came out to the picket line, and I was impressed. But you did what a lot of politicians will come to a strike where we were on strike there, and say, "Oh yeah, I'll help mediate this or whatever." And sometimes that's helpful. But what we wanted you to do was to be on our side, and you did every time. You came there many times over the years after that, because we had it's the most struck school in the country for charter schools. But I want to ask you, not about Instituto, but about the labor movement in general. And as sitting in the city council, how do you see the labor movement. There's many, just like politicians, there's many views coming out of different unions. But what's the role for labor to play in this vision that you have, that we have, of trying to build a better world?
That's a great question. I think that within that, in terms of coalition, labor plays a key role, right? I think the Chicago Teachers Union, many of the labor, many of the labor leaders in the movement have been critical in this fight, like you mentioned, with charter accountability. They have been critical on unionizing spaces, right? And I think Chicago is a labor town. I believe that, labor is fundamental. I think labor is crucial in this fight to build this coalition. I think that's what the obsession of the MAGA fascists is, to undermine labor and attack labor leaders, right? And I think in this fight to build coalition is on the ground. I think as workers, right, we see, for instance, the connections between our immigrant rights groups and our labor rights movement, right? And I think when they start intersecting, right, you see very powerful demonstrations. I'm very grateful, for instance, with one of the CFL leaders, Don Villar, who is, like you said, always there in the picket line for immigrant rights or workers' rights. If he's in the Broadview Detention Center, or if he's on Oak Brook with supporting the Teamsters on a company that's union busting, you see him out there. And I think that is a role, and even when we risk arrest and civil disobedience, I do think that is what we want to see our labor movement, really out there supporting every worker. I think the UAW and CTU nationally have shown the importance of labor leaders, when we go and unapologetically defending Kilmar Garcia, when he was an apprenticeship worker that was deported to El Salvador in one of the most horrendous dictatorships that are in Latin America, right? People are being tortured. I think it was good to see, labor, trade leaders and labor leaders coming there and standing strong for immigrant rights, right? And to talk about the unionization and workers' rights and living wages for all workers, right? I do think, like, when we see, at the extent that we see labor leaders with immigrant rights leaders, with faith leaders, and I think, like, when we see that coalition and that connection of working, and I see that happening more and more. But I do think the leaders of our union movement are essential because of that political clarity, because of that sense of urgency of fighting for public schools, for quality public schools, for the dignified salaries and unions everywhere. I do think that they are in the lead of this movement. I think that our labor leaders, there's no secret, we're about to elect one of our own now to city council. And I think shows the strength of our labor movement. I am a proud steward of SEIU 73. And, again, sometimes we do have disagreements, and I think that's okay. Like we said, we should have disagreements within the movement. That is principle, to have those disagreements. And I think that we got to be careful on those billionaires that are trying to pitch us against each other. Look, because I mentioned how they tried to pitch us against each other, and we saw how Pedro Martinez really flipped the script and created so much chaos in a time that we needed unity in the Chicago public schools, and put a real division between SEIU and CTU, right? Trying to divide and conquer, right? So I do think it's important that as a labor movement, we help to bring our communities together, especially when there's disagreements. That's what I mentioned, leaders in the CFL and other trade unions. I think the time to build strong solidarity on the ground with neighborhoods, with faith leaders, is now. And I'm grateful to have leaders like UAW, CTU, SEIU, and others that are bringing our city together to protect our city. I hope that, and I've seen that support now coming to Zoran in New York. I think UAW, one of the first unions to back it. The AFT supports that. And I think it's important that we don't allow these insiders, the Rams and Cuomos of the world, to divide our labor movement. That's when we have the clarity. That's when we have to stand together and bring then your immigrant rights. Labor movement brings immigrant rights, faith leaders. And if that coalesces, I think that if that's possible, I think that is the path to defeat fascism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our solidarity is precious and important if we're going to build power. So, yes, I agree. I want to pivot here a little bit to talk about the police accountability, public safety. An enormous amount of the city budget goes, and this is true in every city, goes to the police department. And there's been, a movement in Chicago led by the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and others. First around CPAC, the Civilian Police Accountability Council, and then that there was a compromise which led to the ECPS, which is Empowering Communities for Public Safety. It's amazing I remember all these acronyms, but now there's a push for a referendum to try to get the other half of the compromise, community power over policing, and there's a push in the city council to try to get. It's just starting now, but hopefully we'll get a referendum and it'll pass to get a full community control of the police. Can you talk a little bit about public safety, the police department, and these referendums and the effort by the Alliance? And how you see them and how you see that going forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, being a supporter of Carper, before I was an alderman, I was proud to stand with them in multiple issues, from the Laquan McDonald cover-up of Rahm Emanuel to, the reform to have now police district councils now in every district, police district, to now the referendum to have community control of the police. I think that is important. And think honestly, that is one of the main things that billionaire Michael Sachs and Juan Rangel, that now run several PACs, to misinform the public, to talk about how those efforts to actually have resulted on the decrease of violent crime in the city of Chicago, when we investing more on young people, when we investing more on mental health. It's having tangible results, yet they're trying to spin it around and talked about how, we're taking away money from the Chicago Police Department and so forth. By the way, the Chicago Police Department already have gone over budget. Last year, I think out of the $2 billion already bloated budget, they already went over like a few $100 million. Not to name the multiple police misconduct settlements that the city of Chicago has to pay every single year, an average of, I think that we in the last 10 years, we almost reached $1 billion just in police misconduct settlement, from police torture to police misconduct, police brutality, and
these are like lawsuits where you settle.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
Those lawsuits that are very expensive because of human rights violations, right? So that's a thing, from and then just the fact that we have such a huge budget. I mean, for almost over 40% of our budget goes to the Chicago Police Department, and it neglects, public health, it neglects housing, it neglects all the very important areas where we need to invest. So I think last year, in fact, Riley, when we debated, he conceded that we have vacancies in the Chicago Police Department that should not be continued to, they're chronic vacancies that we should not continue to fund just so they can take on police overtime. But he was saying only to be all the voice of opposition anytime that anything is being trying to take from the Chicago Police Department. So all these elements kind of work together, right? They all work together in maintaining the status quo, these bloated budgets in the Chicago Police Department that are not keeping anyone safe, but if anything, are taking away from critical investments for the city to make. So I continue, and I think this year we're starting earlier to organize, to inform the public what we can do with $200 million, right? Just on that, they're going over budget. What we can do with the funding? And I think that we can, and we will create safer communities at the extent that we invest more in housing, more in education, public education, more in youth employment. Those are the mental health and so far. So I think that we as a city have to be, and let's remember the other thing that, the city of Chicago said, we talk about the deficits, right? The deficits on pensions. Let's remember that we have people like Riley that every year, and Marty Quinn, that will go in front of you and tell you even the number of police officers that you need, 13,000 officers, not without any technical analysis, without anything, but that's just the number of people that they want to put. They want to open a new police station, by the way, even though the trend of violent crime is trending down. Instead of saying, well, let's investing more of the things that we know are working, they want to go back to the past, right? So, and I do think that is really critical for us to make sure that we envision a world where we have every right to have control of the police. We have every right as taxpayers, as the people of the city of Chicago to know what they're doing, how they're doing, because for so long our institutions have been created to protect capital, but not to protect people. And I think as we see the ICE kidnappings, and we can see the police, brutality across the country, this is a moment to transform our institutions. That's what I like the term that Stacey Davis Gates have mentioned about the attempt to a third reconstruction, because we really have to reconstruct, rebuild, and transform our institutions so that really institutions of care, of solidarity, of love for their neighbors, so that we can really have quality public education for all, so we can have housing, so we can have the safety nets, mental health, youth employment. In the first 2 years, Mayor Johnson has made great progress. Violent crime is down like 40% because we're investing in those things. But make no mistake, these same elements that I mentioned that are invested in misinforming will try to demonize these efforts as something that is not achievable, is not doable. It is within reach. And this is the way to prevent those horrific police misconduct cases and torture cases and police brutality. But more police accountability, more investments on things that work, that are about care and not about control, and not about brutality, and not about protecting the capital of the billionaires.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, the more you militarize a community, the probably the less happy, loving, all the things you said. You mentioned Stacey Davis Gates, my union president, and so yes, I agree with her and with you on those things. I wanted to go to. Maybe this is similar. You've been outspoken on issues not just for Chicago, but statewide and nationally, and particularly, our enemies have tried to vilify you on different circumstances. But I want to talk a little bit about Palestine and over. You've mentioned it a couple times in this interview over the last couple of years. You've stood with the people of Palestine. And have stood against the genocide, and as did Mayor Johnson. There was a vote in the city council for the ceasefire, and it ended up in a tie. And the mayor typically doesn't vote, but if there's a tie, he's the tiebreaker, and he voted with the people of Palestine as well. Can you talk a little bit about that issue and why, as an alderman in the 25th Ward, you've been compelled to speak out about Palestine and to talk about the genocide?
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you for the question, because that's being, again, I believe that there are two critical issues nationally today, is the genocide in Gaza that is funded with our U.S. tax dollars, and the issue of immigration that is a broken system, is being broken for a long time. Those are some of the major topics that I think we see today. Of course, poverty and inequality and affordability. But those are things that in terms of the national scene. So, and I think that what we see in Gaza is in the genocide, it is kind of what's coming, right? In fact, a lot of our police departments are trained by the IDF, right? So I think like the use of drones, the issue of militarization, the silencing of dissent, those are things that, those are, I think, experiments that we're seeing abroad that now are coming home, masked individuals, now disappearing people, crushing dissent, torturing people abroad in detention, in concentration camps, in dictatorships abroad. Those are things that I think that we have not experienced locally. But as someone that grew up, and I think I consider myself a true American because I'm from the South, I'm from the North, right? And I think that we have every right to speak up and criticize our country. Like when I have my family here, this is where I live. I want our country or city to succeed, and we will not succeed until we have real freedom. And I think our country really, is experiment that has been always, defending. If there's something is as American as any of us is. The fact that we defend and protect First Amendment rights, the right to speak, the right to dissent, the right to criticize. And James Baldwin said something always struck with me, is like that we have the right to criticize America because we love it, right? And we criticize it eternally because I love my neighbors, I love my city, I love my country. And because of that, I cannot be silent when we are complicit in funding such an atrocity of a genocide, when innocent children, seniors, families, men, women alike, are being brutalized, right? And this is not new. It didn't start on October 7th. This is being, a neo-colonial project that has been taking the lives of hundreds of thousands of people for way too long. A neo-colonial project that is doomed to fail, that will fail, that in the 21st century we are allowing this atrocity to happen in front of our very eyes is a call for action. And that's when the DNC was here. One of the things, and look, I joined the group that was a coalition to not commit or vote until we have a platform, an ability for the Palestinian community to have a voice and to have immigrant communities to have a voice so that we can start fixing the one thing that is in everybody's mind. And the failure to do that, I think in retrospect, always time is our best ally, right? In retrospect, look, let's think about what would have happened if we would have a Palestinian representative in the DNC. Let's talk about it. We would have a better plan for immigration, right? That wasn't just to continue the Trump policies that were failing and actually disenfranchised so many people that then later didn't even show up to vote because they didn't believe in anything, right? So I do think that the genocide in Gaza is the defining issue for what country we want to be and we want to become. I think the complicity in the genocide, it is what allowed, for instance, Trump, because this is not a story with Trump, when President Biden allowed arrests and for that matter, our governor, and the criminalization of the student movement. That didn't happen under Trump. Trump is now taking it to the next level when now students are being denied their visas, when Mahmoud Khalil was put in prison without any justification. Trump is a fascist, right? So he's going to try to do what Moody did, what Pinochet did, which is instill fear and silence dissent, right? And to mobilize his base with political violence, as we saw in the killings of 2 elected officials in Minnesota. So I think that what we cannot allow is our country to fall into fascism because of silence. Like Anna Frank said, there's tragic, terrible things happening outside our very rooms right now. And our silence will, Martin Luther King said, is more than, what more problematic than the atrocities of the oppressor is the silence of those who know that we shouldn't do that. So I tell you that today, as we fight to really fight fascism everywhere, because these fascist policies, unfortunately, that we have funded, like mentioned the Pinochet, this was in 1973. In 1973, the CIA killed a democratically elected socialist popular president and instilled a bloody dictator. Now, and this is not Trump, not only Trump. Moody did this, 20, 30,000 people in India that have been brutalized in mass tortures and mass murders, right? With the complicity of our own government, right? And that's Biden. There was not even Trump yet. Trump is taking it to the next level, right? When he lied to the public and said, we released the Epstein file, we stopped the wars. You cannot, we cannot believe, fascists like Trump, but yet the inability to present a real honest alternative, right? When the party defeated Bernie, defeated the movement, defeated what really will coalesce. But I tell you that it is important that we end the genocide, because I tell you that this is going to be remembered by everybody, that I don't want to have to tell my children, look in their eyes and say I was silent when this was happening, right? And also when the immigrant communities, when people are being kidnapped and put into concentration camps, we got people look into people's eyes. And that's what I challenge Governor Pritzker, right? They're the leaders of the Democratic Party, which I'm not convinced that they learned the lesson, because we just saw what happened in the last election. We seem to be going in the same direction. The way forward is to speak truthfully and honestly about ending the neo-colonial murderous genocidal project in the Middle East, because it's not only in Gaza and Palestinians, this is spreading. And also have, for once and for all, address the issues domestically, because the dictators like Bukele, like Milei, like Noboa in Ecuador, that we are supporting abroad, are creating the conditions for people to come to our country to begin with. At the extent that we are, when we stop collaborating with dictators and we actually put a funding in addressing poverty at home and less in destabilizing countries abroad, we'll see coordination, collaboration. But for that to happen, to me, I think it's clear that the fight is here. The fight is in our country. But I feel optimistic because younger voters, people under 40, like vast majority, over 75%, are saying that the genocide in Gaza is an atrocity that must stop. It's no more, no more what it used to be in the past. Same thing with immigration. Younger voters are really who capture not only who elected Zoran in a large majority. Let's remember they also elected Mayor Johnson. And that's what is important, that we did not betray them on the curfew, that we don't betray them in youth employment, that we never betray them, because those are the people that we deliver, the working people, not the billionaires.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted, you mentioned immigration, and you started to answer it along with the question on Palestine, but I want to give you an opportunity here to talk a little more, because this is another national issue as well as a local issue, and we've talked about it from a local perspective during this interview. But what does in your view? I mean, you're an immigrant from Ecuador, and people would say, "Oh, well, you did it all right, and you've been successful. People should follow in Byron's footsteps." But what in your view does a just immigration policy look like, and what should we be fighting for on that level?
Yes, I think like what is important again is for us to look at our foreign policies. Our foreign policies to the average American resident is completely, to use the same is very strange. It's really, people don't even know what happens, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia. This is completely removed, and for way too long, the Pentagon, right? That's what I think the Trump appeals to the MAGA movement, right, as an anti-system, right? The use of the CIA and the FBI to crush dissent, and there's truth to that, right? If we look at what happened with Fred Hampton, and look at what happened with Allende, right? So I think like it is important that we offer a comprehensive solution. I think Democrats are really terrible when it comes to, to offer a real solution, right, to what we must do to address the issue, for instance, of immigration. And it starts with the countries of origin, right? When we start destabilizing democracy and to aid dictators like Noboa or Milei or Bukele, what we're doing is exacerbating. I mean, right now we're collaborating at the extent that we're paying people to be detained in a foreign country run by a dictator in El Salvador, right? So I do think like we must always respect the self-determination. That's what happened in Chile in 1973 has to be discussed. It happened with the Chicago Boys here. It'll be good to have a conversation with the Chicago Boys so that they understand the consequences, right, of what they did, because there's no accountability. So we keep doing the same thing. So addressing the conditions, I mean, President Petro was here in Chicago, and he spoke about this. He said, look, if the billions of dollars that we invested abroad to destabilize and to sell war machines and so we put it to create, for instance, policies that will help us protect the Amazon, right? The Amazon in South America, there will be less people migrating because they will be able to, to work in their own land, to be able to, to feed themselves, to not having to migrate because the whole towns have been burned because of climate change, because there's no water, because there's no food, right? So I think at the extent that we help alleviate the issues of poverty, inequality, especially in indigenous communities in our countries that are largely who are coming here, like you mentioned, someone from Ecuador. I think a lot of people that are coming from the indigenous areas where, unfortunately, the new president, a neoliberal, corrupt, the son of the richest man of the country, treats the country as his own banana republic. That's what they do, right? The exploitation. In fact, Afro-Ecuadorians, I mean, there was a family that was disappeared, basically, kids that were disappeared by the military. Afro-Ecuadorians were, basically their lives, according to these dictators, mean nothing. So I think that at the extent that we do not collaborate with dictators, that we don't destabilize democracy, and that we rather use or resources to mitigate poverty and help for them to have self-determination, is the way for them and for people not to migrate, to our country. I think like now Trump has really created so much fear, not only on immigrants, he's created so much fear on anybody. Now, it's not only immigrants or trans or Muslims, that can be any citizen who can be detained. I was just reading a report from Virginia where a principal from Virginia was not only detained, was brutalized and incarcerated for no reason, just for being for being Latino. So the racial profiling, the masked individuals, that's something that happened already. In fact, not only Chile served as an experiment ground for a dictator to disappear people, to brutalize people, to torture. In fact, they also put charter schools as well. They put a lot of experiments, privatization and steroids, right? And now they're trying to export these models now here to our own country. So I think that at the extent that we have international solidarity, not this extortion type of foreign policy where if you don't do what I said, then I charge you tariffs. This is what, are we back to the colonial powers of Britain, or I think going back centuries, right, where extortion and blackmail become the way of negotiating. I do think that it's only going to worsen, and when we bomb countries, when we destabilize countries, we have more migrants and refugees from the Middle East, from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia. So for me, international solidarity is international cooperation and coordination to really challenge the global challenges that we must. Climate change, these results of wars, right? Those are things that and the massive displacement that is happening by the millions. The challenge of we now having potable water and so forth. So I do think that at the extent that we look at foreign policy as a way to cooperate and coordinate abroad and at home, we will truly have real freedom, equity, and justice for all. Today, again, we continue to see fascist policies at home, but these fascist policies have been abroad for way too long.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you also for being so generous with your time here. I know we've been talking for quite a while, and you're a busy alderman, taking care of many things, have many things going on at the same time. But before we end the interview, I want to give you a chance if there's anything we didn't cover that you want to raise here, you can do that now, or if there's anything you want to encourage our Fight Back Radio listeners to do to motivate them to activism or to point them in a certain direction, now would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I appreciate it. I just want to thank you, Richard, for such a good platform. I think the time flew when usually when we have a really in-depth conversation. And I think it's important because these are the good spaces when we can have a candid conversation, an honest conversation to really dig deep and in-depth on the issues of working people, unlike, unfortunately, other platforms that give you maybe 2 minutes to respond to the complexity of this. So I really appreciate the time. I think this is the time, as you mentioned, for everybody to be activated. We must stop fascism. That is that's the number one goal. And for that, yes, anybody who is instilling or seeing to divide and conquer, we gotta move along and move right along and right directly into what is going to help us build coalition. So if you are in labor, if you're in your union, if you are a faith leader, if you are just a resident, whatever, in your community and seeing immigration agents coming in and disappearing people, whatever it is that you do, this is the time to get involved. Get involved in your local organization, in your local union, in your local in your local rapid response team. Education, if you have a podcast, if you have ideas to disseminate information, if you're a writer that want to disseminate local news about what you see in the world, this is a time for organizing to activate. Don't despair. Don't let the fascists silence you or keep you afraid. That's what they want. But they cannot silence millions of people. They cannot do that. There's a lot more of us than them. So build coalition, even with the people that you don't agree with. Keep building coalition. Those billionaires are a small, tiny minority. And yes, they have a few puppets that they'll do as they say, especially corrupt. That's what I mentioned, people like Rangel, because those are people who have been condemned publicly. Those are people who have so many corruption allegations that have nothing else to do. But those are not the people that we should listen to, right? We should not listen to billionaires or corrupt politicians. We need to make sure that we listen to one another, that we care with one another. Have more block parties, more block meetings, join your local organization, listen to more podcasts like Fight Back. But this is the time to get activated. This is the time to get organized. That's how we defeat fascism. And I tell you, I feel optimistic with the young people. I think it's important that we continue to build this transgenerational support and collaboration, right? Across ages, across ethnicities, across ideologies. this is the moment to defeat fascism. And I think this is the time for action. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak back. And, you want to get involved in our 25th ward, independent political organization, or your local union, local group, whatever you are, but continue to organize and fight back.
All right. Thank you so much for being our guest on Fight Back Radio, Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
So the ballot or the bullet, that was an interesting site by Byron Sigcho Lopez. But, he talks about, and really gives us some vision of what it's like to be a progressive, radical socialist alderman, and some of the contradictions that you face and some of the, the bad guys that you're going to be up against. Clearly, Byron's an intelligent, well-rounded person who spoke on just a whole bunch of different issues. I don't think there's too many aldermen who could have spoke so authoritatively on so much. So I thank you for that interview, Byron. And as I said, we look forward to working you going forward. This is an important time, and it's we need elected officials to stand up, but few will without us pushing them. Byron's the exception to that. And so, we thank him for that. But to be effective, we want people here to join an organization, get involved in stuff. If you're not sure what you want to do, send an email to me at Fightback Radio, richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com, and I'll respond. I'll give you maybe brainstorm some ideas depending where you live and what your interests are. But it's important that everybody gets involved. And we need all of us, however you can, as Byron said. So I thank him for that. Also, I want to, it was interesting, I think, to hear about the electoral politics and how this is working out for us. There's there's some good signs coming out of New York City and other places as well. So we need to use every tool in our toolbox to fight for working class people, to fight for oppressed people, and to fight for the change that we need. Under the Trump administration, we're starting to see lots of repression. They're just masked men are grabbing immigrants off the street and and detaining them, and people are being deported. I think we're not even sure all the things that are going on. But I want to bring one instance to people's attention that's very important. In Los Angeles, where there's been lots of oppression, people may have heard about David Huerta, but less well known, but equally important is Alejandro Oriana, who we spoke about in the last episode as well. But he's a Teamster and activist from the Central CSO, and he's been arrested by the Trump people. And basically charged with organizing protests. I don't know the exact charges. I think we said it on the last episode, but it's important that people stand up for Alejandro. He's a good person who is standing up for his sisters and brothers and siblings who are being grabbed by ICE and protesting. And, we're starting to see in Los Angeles some of the repression that's happened. Go back and listen to the episode with Sol Marquez, and she'll talk a little bit more about this. But we need people to support Alejandro. And we're going to have a National Day of Protest on August 7th. So, check with your local organizations. There's the Committee to Stop FBI Repression is coordinating this nationally. So it's stopfbi.org. You can go to stopfbi.org and find out what's going on in your area. But we want people to stand with Alejandro because he's, this could be any of us. This could be any of us. And as Byron Sigcho Lopez just told us, if we stand together in our millions, they can't do nothing about it. There's only a few of them. And it's important that we do stand together in our millions to fight for justice. So I want to encourage everybody to get involved. This is a very, very important time. So anyways, I want to thank our production team here at Fight Back Radio, which is always doing a crack job. Lane Dorsey, Caetano Silvera, Shane Tremley, and Dodd McColgan. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.